Got you.
Yeah, do you know what my buddy was at a sushi restaurant?
The oil industry is one of the biggest and hardest to control industry in the United States. Point in fact, BP Oil Company. Beyond Petroleum started as a small company in 1954. 20 years ago, they were having some financial problems, but they were rescued by new management in 1995. Since then, BP has become a large company, taking over 7 other different companies, including Amoco and Arco. And at one time, they were looking to take over Exxon, which is the biggest oil company. But BP is best known for its oil spill. But the oil spill could have been prevented had the government taken better action. BP is certainly looked down upon by the American public, and in my opinion, rightly so. But you must realize that the government did very little or almost nothing to prevent the oil spill. What I intend to do for you today is to inform you of the steps that the government could have taken to prevent the spill, but didn't. One of the biggest issues concerning BP in relation to the government is that the government had very many signals of an imminent disaster, and they took no action against it. In 2003 alone, in 1 year, BP had 3 oil spills. In 2003, in the Mississippi Canyon, in May 21, 2003, in the Mississippi Canyon, they had an oil spill of approximately 2,450 barrels, not gallons, barrels, of 58% synthetic base-drilled mud. The next month, this happened in 2003, where an emergency riser disconnected because of the winds and the waves is taken down, and that was just a month after the spill before. On August 3, 2003, it had a spill on the same rig that it had in 2010. And that spill in 2003 was 143 barrels of oil that were spilled into the sea. Just in 1 year, BP had 3 accidents. And there are many, many more accidents that BP had, both big and small, and not just on water, but there's also, for instance, the Texas spill, which if you guys are interested, it's a very fascinating story. Due to these many spills, one can only wonder, why would the government give BP another contracting right when they had already had such a bad history of accidents? Which leads me to my next point, which is how the legal system of the government is flawed. All companies in the United States can very easily get contracting rights to drill. Former Chief of Justice Department's Environment Crime Section, David Ullman, tells us that our laws don't create any barriers, any limits on oil companies' ability to operate. As soon as they get their mess cleaned up, they can start drilling again. In other words, no matter how many times they disobey the government, no matter how many times they are charged for criminal charges, and no matter how many times they put lives and nature in danger, they can get drilling rights again. And by law, the government is prohibited from using their history to deny their contracting rights. Needless to say, this isn't exactly the smartest law that our government has. One more way that the government messed up was in the mineral management, or called the MMS. This agency, the MMS, lacked scrutiny over BP. This agency is a subcommittee to the Department of the Interior, and it had unethical behavior. And while individual behavior may not seem relevant, it is this unethical agency that allowed BP to become BP. In 2008, Earl Devaney, which is an inspector for the Department of the Interior, did an investigation on MMS. And he found that while on the job, while in the offices, while in the desks, these people, the MMS, were doing financial self-dealing. They were accepting gifts from energy companies, otherwise known as bribes, and they were using cocaine and had sexual misconduct while at the job. And that was the government agency. So with such things going on with their ethical behavior, it's no wonder they overlooked so much. When an oil company turns in an application, they are supposed to turn in a cleanup layout, which tells them how they will take care of a spill in case it happens. Well, BP did just that. And they turned in an application saying about how they would rescue walruses and sea lions. And in the Gulf of Mexico, there are no walruses or sea lions. The fact was that they actually copy-pasted a cleanup layout from an Alaska spill instead of making their own layout for the Gulf of Mexico. So, and the bad thing is that BP turned that in, but what's even worse is that the MMS didn't catch that. They accepted it as if this was okay, when we all know that it wasn't. And they also they also gave BP a categorical exclusion, which means that BP didn't have to turn in any information because they thought that, MMS thought that there was no significant impact on nature or the environment. And as we all came to know in 2010, the MMS lacked serious judgment because it was a huge impact to the environment. So in conclusion, the American public should be wary of BP, but we must also realize that our government had a lot to do with it. Our officials aren't blameless. After all, it was this government who failed to recognize that BP's history posed a problem. It was this government that has such lenient drilling rights that forgive the history. And it is the MMS who allowed BP to exclude such critical information. And as for the reformed MMS, now called the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, 11 days ago, it approved BP to start drilling undersea again. So all we can do is hope that BP and the government have finally learned their lesson on regulation. Thank They're like hiring prostitutes to go while at the job. That's ridiculous.
That's a party.
Is there anything we could do to like? Well, what they did is they started a petition. They reformed the MMS, so they cut it up into 3 parts. But I mean, still, it still gave. It was the same thing that gave BP the drilling rights again 11 days ago. So I mean, they tried to do something about it, but not really working. Oh, shut
All right, let's start with the delivery issues. The body movement, sometimes your footwork is a little complicated and feels a little awkward. Same sort of thing. There are a few gestures that look like there's a mild amount of anxiety, but most of the time it's pretty solid. You're facing the audience. The gestures, you've got some good indicators while you're speaking. Sometimes it's a little excessive, and so you might want to be a little less animated there. On the other hand, your facial expressions, I think, are pretty animated, and we know that you clearly feel real passionately about what you're talking about. You have really solid eye contact with most parts of the audience during the presentation.